God, help me, man. Oh, God, help me.
She loved him endlessly. I mean, the sun setting rose with Corey.
You could tell just by being around them that they were in love.
But as the investigation into the crime unfolds, it becomes clear that this seemingly perfect couple harbored some deep and potentially deadly secrets.
We all knew about the other woman, but 6 women?
I was asked if I wanted to make some money.
From our perspective, it was basically just greed and selfishness.
I asked her, was it for business or pleasure?
And her answer was?
She was like, you decide.
On one hand, he was a saint. On the other hand, he was the devil. We didn't know what to believe.
It's still unbelievable, still a shock. I feel like all of this is really still unreal.
July 9th, 2010. It's a warm summer day in Addis, Louisiana, a small community located on the banks of the Mississippi in West Baton Rouge Parish.
It's a suburb of Baton Rouge, upscale, very attractive housing there.
Everyone's connected, and it's very much a neighbor-friendly area, low crime.
But the quiet, crime-free reputation of Addis is about to be tested in an unimaginable way. At approximately 12:45 p.m., 41-year-old mother of 2, Monique Kitts, returns home from work on her lunch break with her 2 children, 18-year-old Dory and 11-year-old Corey Jr.
When we opened the door, we saw glass.
There was glass shattered on the floor. And she said the first thing she thought was, I'll be damned. Corey done knocked my vase over.
Corey is Monique's husband of 16 years. After calling out his name, Monique and her children head to the master bedroom.
Corey? Yeah, Corey! When she got to the room, she saw he was in the bed.
My mom went to tap his foot, and then I noticed she hurried up and bagged up, and she was saying something's not right. She noticed blood. She just started screaming.
Moments later, 911 dispatchers receive a call from the Kitts residence.
Oh, God, help me. There's blood right here.
She's hysterical, she's screaming, she's hollering. The kids are screaming and they're hollering.
I just walked in my door and there was glass everywhere.
Someone broke into your house?
Yes. Somebody must have broken into my, oh my God.
Unsure if the shooter is still on the premises, the operator instructs Monique to lock her bedroom door and remain there with her 2 children. Minutes later, police arrive at the scene.
When we went through the door, guns were drawn. When you hear possible burglary in progress, you got to think, we got an armed suspect there. What are we looking at? Is it more than one? We slowly go through the whole residence. We each took an area. We wanted to make sure nobody was in there. Nothing was found.
Children in the background, just like screaming and hollering. Maybe the person is in the home or in the bedroom, because someone could still be there.
When I first laid eyes upon Monique, Dory, and Corey Kitts Jr., they were up against the wall, facing the bed, and were screaming.
It doesn't take long for investigators to realize precisely why Monique and her children are so upset.
I noticed Corey Kitts on the bed, covered with blood. As I approached the body, I saw there was 3 bullet holes in his head.
He was found killed and lying there in a pool of his own blood.
As police begin clearing the crime scene, the Kitts family seems shell-shocked. For Monique and Corey Kitts, it's a horrific ending to what had been a seemingly all-American romance. Born in 1969, Monique Oubry grew up in an upper-middle-class home in Plaquemine, Louisiana.
My mother has 5 children. All of us are spoiled, every last one. As you can probably imagine, Monique was spoiled also.
She was just very well liked, and she got along with everybody.
Monique's bright, vivacious personality made her a beloved classmate by the time she hit high school.
She was always on the go, doing something. Like I said, she was always friendly, so she always had a lot of friends.
After high school, Monique attended McNeese State University in nearby Lake Charles, where she majored in childhood education.
She loves kids. She's always loved kids. She didn't want to teach at school. She wanted daycare.
After college, Monique returned to Plaquemine to start working full-time at a supercenter. While retail wasn't Monique's dream job, the hard-working sales associate met another store employee who would change her life forever. His name was Corey Kitts.
Miss Monique, how are you?
I'm fine, Mr. Corey. How are you?
I'm doing well.
He would always come in the department where she was, clowning around, and they just became friends.
Corey was a nice-looking guy.
Like Monique, Corey grew up in Plaquemine and was also known for his outgoing personality.
He had a big crush on her, and he was always doing sweet little things. He was so charismatic, and his personality and sense of humor actually won her over.
It was like he swept her off her feet.
Pretty soon, Monique and Corey were inseparable.
She loved the ground he walked on. She loved Corey, and Corey loved Monique.
That's how she felt about him. He was her world. You know, he was her heart.
Within a few months, they moved in together. And not long after that, Monique broke some big news to her mother.
I said, okay, what is it? Well, they had started staying together by this time. I'm gonna have a baby. I said, well, when you sleep with a man every night, those things happen.
In November of 1991, Monique gave birth to their daughter, Dory. Soon after, the couple officially tied the knot.
You could tell just by being around them that they were in love.
Monique was very excited when she had Dory. She didn't really want to go back to work. He didn't want her to go back to work. And that's when their daycare business came about.
With Corey's love and support, Monique's dream of running a daycare became a reality. And soon, business was booming.
Within a month, she had so many kids, they didn't have anywhere to put them. She loved them. She was good to them.
Monique's daycare business proved so successful that by 1999, she moved the daycare out of her home and into a new location in Plaquemine. However, that wasn't the only good news she and Corey received that year.
Monique and Corey had a second child, a beautiful son they named Corey Jr.
Not long after the birth of their son, Corey landed a well-paying job at a local chemical plant.
Corey was an operator, really good job, in this area.
He was making good money, maybe $80,000 to $100,000 or more income.
Over the next decade, the happy couple enjoyed the fruits of their hard-earned labor and moved into their dream home in Addis, Louisiana.
She had her income with the daycare and including his, so she was set up pretty good.
I used to always say I wanted her life because to me, she had it all. She had a good husband. She had a nice, big, beautiful house.
But on the afternoon of July 9th, 2010, Corey and Monique's dream life was ripped apart.
Monique goes in and finds her husband dead.
It's still unbelievable to me, still a shock. My daddy's not here.
Corey was always happy-go-lucky. Who would do this? Why would somebody want to kill Corey?
What investigators are about to discover will turn the case upside down and have folks in the quiet little town of Addis questioning everything they thought they knew about this picture-perfect couple.
You start realizing something's not right.
After 16 years of marriage, Monique Kitts and her husband Corey were living the good life in Addis, Louisiana. But at approximately 12:45 p.m. on July 9th, 2010, their life together was turned upside down.
Monique Kitts and her children came back to the house, and they then walked into the bedroom, and that's where they found Corey laying in the bed. He was unresponsive. He had been shot.
As police worked to secure the scene and console Monique and her children, word of the shooting reaches their family.
I said, what happened? What happened? Somebody done shot Corey. I said, oh my God.
By the time we got there, it was a circus. Monique was in like a despondent attitude. And when she saw my mom, it was like she just broke down.
With the family sequestered outside the house, investigators begin processing the crime scene.
Mr. Kitts was shot 3 times. It looked like someone had got into the home and shot Mr. Kitts in his sleep.
Next to Corey's body, investigators find 3 spent shell casings.
So what do you got?
340 caliber casings.
Given the condition of the Kitts' home, robbery seems a likely motive.
Rest of the house pretty ransacked. Let's go check it out.
The house had broken glass on the floor near the entrance door. And the furniture in the house, some of it was turned upside down.
It looked like a break-in.
But looks can be deceiving, especially once investigators conduct a more thorough search of the premises.
It didn't take long to figure that there's no signs of forced entry, so now we got a problem.
Nothing was stolen. They had money, they had a weapon, they had computers, they had flat screen TV, a number of things that were never touched. It appeared to be very much a staged scene. The point of it was not to commit a robbery, but to go in and kill a man.
But why Corey Kitts? That afternoon, investigators begin questioning Corey's grieving spouse, Monique.
Monique was upset, visibly upset.
When I interviewed her the first time, I was asking her questions about, particularly that day, what was going on.
According to Monique, her husband had worked the previous evening.
He came in 5:15.
In the morning?
He went home and took a shower. Monique says that they talked, they clowned a little bit.
She then left to meet Corey's sister.
I got up to go walking. Came back, he was still woke. I told him I had walked 3 miles. He laughed at me.
And then what happened?
I went to work.
Monique says that shortly after noon, she left work and took her children home so they could all have lunch together at the house. That's when they discovered Corey in a pool of blood on the bed.
Anytime.
And he didn't move. I didn't know what was wrong. And then that's when I saw the blood. And I just screamed.
Monique's daughter, Dory, confirms her mother's account.
Did your mama come back home? Were you aware if she came back home, or do you know where she was at the time?
What?
As for Dory, she claims she left their home around 8:40 that morning.
Left and I walked downstairs and his door was closed, so I figured he must still be asleep because he had just got off, so I didn't mess with him.
Dory worked at the daycare during the summer. She went to work. My mother had Corey Jr. So she brought Corey to the daycare. That's why the 3 of them went home to lunch together. And that's when they found Corey.
It was crazy. Like, it was really just a surreal moment. They asked, how was my mom and dad's relationship? How was our relationship?
Dory is adamant that neither she nor her mother had anything to do with her dad's death. But she believes she might know someone who did.
On June the 9th, 1 month before their homicide, Corey Kitts comes home and he sees a red car backed up across the street from his home.
I just feel like somebody's watching.
Could the unidentified driver of this car be the same individual who murdered Corey in cold blood? Investigators are about to discover a half-dozen reasons why that might just be true, each one more tawdry and tantalizing than the next.
This is not going to be a typical case. I was absolutely shocked at the content of it.
We all knew about the other woman, but 6 women?
Just hours after the shooting death of 40-year-old Corey Kitts, police in Addis, Louisiana have learned a startling piece of information from Corey's daughter.
Maybe a month or so before the murder of Corey Kitts, he had saw a red car that was kind of suspicious that was around the neighborhood.
I just feel like somebody's watching.
Investigators wonder, had Corey simply been paranoid? Or could this theory have legs? When police interview one of the Kitts' neighbors, Sean Monroe, they get a possible answer.
The neighbor said a silver truck was backed in the driveway.
Probably a bit after 7:30 or something, I went outside. I saw like a metallic silver vehicle that was bagged up behind Corey's truck. It wasn't there long, but it was there.
While that vehicle description did not match the one given by Dory, it did indicate that someone, or possibly multiple people, paid Corey a visit on the morning of the murder.
And because the Kitts' home showed no signs of a break-in, investigators think whoever killed Corey had access to the home.
If you didn't have forced entry, then somebody had a key, or somebody let them in.
The question now is, who besides Monique and her daughter had access to the home?
To answer that question, detectives take a deeper look at Corey's personal life.
We're in a small town. Everybody knows everybody's business.
We just kept getting a lot of feedback that Corey was having some affairs. And, you know, we know that that's one of the things that you have to, hey, could very well be one of those people.
In order to confirm the allegations of infidelity, detectives reach out to the friends and relatives of the Kitts family.
First of all, we heard rumors that Corey wasn't that faithful of a husband.
I'm afraid that's true.
Monique chose not to believe it for years. And then it must have gotten where it was other people that she really trusts, that came to her and told her, this is what's going on. I said, well, you can do one of two things. You can stay there and put up with it, or you can pick up your bags and walk out the door. She said, well, I don't want to go anywhere. I want to make my marriage work.
But Monique's mother says the harder her daughter worked to save her marriage, the more difficult it became.
We discovered that he was having 5 or 6 affairs.
We all knew about the other woman, but 6 women?
The revelation that Corey was carrying on not 1, but 6 affairs at the time of his death opens up a Pandora's box of possible killers.
All these women were potential suspects because it could have been one of them was mad because they might have found out about another one.
So now, guess what? You need to go figure out, you know, where were they at? Do they know anything about what's going on? What was the relationship about?
Over the next 2 months, detectives identify all 6 of Corey's lovers and bring them in for questioning. They start with Corey's co-worker, Janice Thompson, who's allegedly been sleeping with Corey for 10 years.
So you and Corey were having a thing?
Yes, we had a fling. But at the end of the day, we both always went home to our families. I never hurt Corey.
Janice Thompson swears to detectives that she's innocent and was at work at the time of the murder. Given her cooperation, it appears that she is telling the truth.
But even with Janice Thompson eliminated as a suspect, there are 5 more of Corey's paramours investigators need to question.
Of course, the people that he may have had affairs with were viable suspects. Every one of them was looked into. It was determined that they had nothing to do with this murder. He did have extramarital affairs, but as a whole, nothing to indicate that they wanted murdered.
But if these 6 women weren't involved, then who was?
Police seized Corey's telephone records. really the records of the entire family. They did this in order to figure out any connections they may have overlooked.
It's that search of Corey and Monique's cell phone records that reveals something truly unexpected and explosive.
Once Monique's cell phone records were analyzed, it was apparent that Corey Kitts was not the only man in her life.
The slaying of 40-year-old Corey Kitts inside his home 2 months prior has residents in Addis, Louisiana on edge, and local investigators scrambling for answers.
The investigation revealed that Corey was actively having relationships with 6 different women.
Through the cell records, we were able to determine that they were not anywhere in the vicinity of the time of the homicide.
But when police expand their phone record search to include Corey and his immediate family, 2 calls jump out at them.
Like, man, something's really weird in the phone records of Monique.
On the day of the homicide, Monique Kitts was talking with Carl Michael and David Ray Johnson.
Who were Carl Michael and David Ray Johnson, and what was their connection to Monique? To answer that question, investigators again circle back to Corey and Monique's extended family.
She met a young man who delivered milk to the daycare. His name was David Johnson.
He came to the daycare. We had about 4 or 5 different milkmen, and he was the friendliest. He was the most helpful.
Hello, how are you? I got your milk for you. You doing all right today?
Those close to Monique suspected that the handsome and charming David Ray Johnson might have been delivering her more than just fresh milk.
He definitely came off as someone who was very confident about his ability to get women. You know, maybe he was a charmer.
Call you later.
Oh, okay.
Good to see you.
Okay. I asked her one day, is something going on between you and David? Oh, my God. That was her favorite word. Oh, my God, Mama. Why would you ask me something like that? I said, I have my reasons.
For investigators, rumors of an affair between Monique and David Johnson are reason enough to haul the handsome milkman in for questioning.
David Ray Johnson being this woman's man, I could see him thinking that since she wasn't going to leave her husband, and he'd had this affair, it seemed to me he certainly had a motive.
Under questioning, David says he first met Monique in 2006.
She was the owner. She was one who paid me. I met her like that.
David says he and Monique maintained a strictly professional relationship. That is until a few months later, when Monique approached him after one of his deliveries.
We kind of exchanged numbers, and I asked her, was it for business or pleasure?
And her answer was?
And she was like, you decide.
I believe that's what she was longing for at the time, and that moved into a sexual relationship.
She rented and leased an apartment for him so he'd have somewhere to stay, and allegedly so they would have some place to meet up and carry on their affair.
She was texting, she was calling, she paid bills for David Ray Johnson during the course of their relationship, gave him money.
She was having an affair with him, but she was helping him out, and she had the financial means to do so.
I could see him thinking that if Corey was out of the way, he could get more out of her. He had a motive.
But according to David Johnson, that simply wasn't the case.
David admits he had talked to Monique the morning of the shooting, but claimed they had stopped seeing each other a few months before. He also claimed he was delivering milk the morning of the shooting.
When did you find out that Corey Kitts was dead?
When I ended my route.
We knew David could not have possibly murdered Corey. We know where he was the entire time of the homicide.
And while police decide to keep David Johnson on their radar, they shift their focus to the other man Monique appears to have called the morning of the murder, a man named Carl Michael Howard.
The interesting thing here is that Monique didn't just call Carl Howard once or twice. In fact, they exchanged over 700 telephone calls in the months leading up to the day of the murder.
David Ray Johnson and Carl Michael Howard were best friends. Monique had been doing David's taxes, and Carl Michael needed someone to do his taxes for him. And David introduced the two of them.
Like David and Monique, Carl hailed from Baton Rouge, though he now called Atlanta, Georgia home.
He was a technician at a cell phone company.
Carl Howard worked for Verizon. He had an engineering degree in cell technology.
We became very good friends over the years. He was just also a fun-loving person, very humorous, liked to crack jokes, loved to talk.
Was Monique carrying on an affair with Carl Michael Howard as well as David Johnson? Monique's family doesn't think so, and they are convinced Carl is not violent.
And if you be around him and you talk to him, he is so nice. He reminds you of a big teddy bear. I don't think he has a mean bone in his body.
While Monique's family doesn't believe Carl had anything to do with Corey's death, investigators spot a red flag.
Carl Howard made 4 trips to Louisiana from Atlanta, which we were able to track. He comes in April, then the very end of March, the 1st of April. He comes in June, he comes in July.
In fact, phone records indicate Carl Michael Howard was in Baton Rouge on the day of the murder.
Every time he would come, he would contact David Ray Johnson. He would contact Monique on every one of these trips.
So they decide to bring Carl in for questioning, and they get right to the point.
Did y'all have any kind of intimate affair, you and her? Shoot me straight, man. You know, if you did, you did. Was that your little buddy?
Not at all.
Did you speak with Monique the day of the murder?
Yeah, early that morning.
What did y'all talk about?
Nothing, just usual chit-chat.
We know he was in Baton Rouge. He did not deny that, but he said he was with his sister. They had went to her house that morning, and he was out with her that whole day shopping for cakes for the birthday party for her daughter.
Detectives intend to check out Carl's story, but before they release him, they learn something else.
Carl Howard's vehicle was a red car. On June the 9th, 1 month before their homicide, Corey Kitts comes home and he sees a red car backed up across the street from his home.
But perhaps the biggest red flag surrounding Carl Howard was the other phone call he made the day of the shooting.
Monique Kitts was talking with Carl and David Ray Johnson. There was then conversation later with Corey Knox and Carl Howard. Corey Knox was more of a person that we would call a career criminal.
Who had been in trouble with the police on several occasions, known to sell drugs, known to carry guns.
It was just too much of a coincidence. It just seemed very suspicious.
But detectives still aren't sure how all these pieces fit together.
How are these people connected? How do they know one another? What is the extent of their relationship?
This is where you start to see from the outside looking in that there was this plot.
You said y'all wasn't perfect. What was the biggest discussions about?
Money. The investigation into the murder of 40-year-old Corey Kitts has unearthed a string of extramarital affairs of both Corey and his wife, Monique. It's also led police to focus their investigation on 2 men, Monique's friend, Carl Michael Howard, and an ex-con named Corey Knox.
Corey Knox had many scrapes with the police before.
But while Corey's criminal past is illuminating, so too are his and Carl Michael Howard's phone records.
On the morning of the murder, Carl called David Johnson and Monique, which wasn't unusual, but then there were a series of calls between Carl Howard and Corey Knox, leading right up to the murder.
It was determined on the morning of the murder that Carl's cell phone pinged several times off of a cell tower near Corey Knox's home in North Baton Rouge.
But in the hours after that flurry of calls, both Carl Howard and Corey Knox's cell phones went suspiciously cold.
Their phones aren't pinging off of any towers. They just go completely silent.
Their phone is blacked out. And then what's going on during that period? There's a murder.
That's just too much of a coincidence.
Despite detective suspicions, there's still the question of Carl Howard's alibi.
He stated that he hadn't been with family the whole day.
But when investigators speak to Carl's sister, she tells them a different story.
She told us I don't lie. She said, and I'm not going to lie for anyone and get myself in trouble. He was not with me. He did not go with me that morning. She said the only time I saw him was that evening.
So you were out birthday shopping with your brother?
No, not with him.
So you didn't see him at all that day?
Between his phony alibi, his phone records, and the fact that Carl's car was seen at the Kitts' residence 1 month prior to the date of the murder, it looks like Carl killed Corey Kitts with the help of Corey Knox.
Still, investigators need to determine if the two other people Carl spoke with the morning of the murder might be involved.
We found numerous contacts the day before and on the day of the homicide. Numerous calls made by Carl Howard, by David Ray Johnson, and with Monique.
Of particular interest to detectives are the multiple calls and texts Monique made in the hours leading up to her husband's murder, nearly all of them to David Johnson and Carl Howard.
She stays on that phone for approximately 19, 20 minutes, all the way while she's driving to Plaquemine from Addis on her way to work to a daycare. She arrives at a daycare about 8:05 in the morning. She hangs up the phone, I think, with David Ray Johnson, and she's still on that phone with Carl Howard for another 4 minutes.
All that morning, you got talk between them. You got her talking with Carl Howard, with David Ray, and then everything stops after the murder.
On October 14th, 2010, roughly 3 months after her husband was murdered, Monique Kitts is questioned for a second time. Investigators ask Monique to describe her relationship with Carl Howard and how often they spoke on the phone.
Occasionally, every now and then maybe.
How can you have 60-something calls in one day, one morning? That ain't limited contact. That's a lot of contact.
Monique, look, you text them a lot. You talk to them a lot.
The volume of calls and texts between Monique and Carl Howard isn't detectives' only point of contention.
In the last 6 months, are you involved with any other personal relationships that may come out?
Nothing. Detectives knew that was a lie, that she was in fact in a recent relationship with David Johnson.
Do you have any information about why your husband was killed or who did it that you have not told us?
No, I've told you everything.
While detectives think there's more to the story than Monique is letting on, without further evidence linking her to the crime, they have no choice but to release her.
Monique does have an alibi. Police were looking for something more than just a string of cell phone records in order to connect her with the murder of her husband.
Looking into their financial records, investigators determined the Kitts were barely keeping their heads above water, Monique in particular.
She didn't have any money. Everybody thought her business was doing well, but you know, she was spending a lot of money. She was giving a lot of money to David, her boyfriend.
In fact, the excess spending had driven the couple to the brink of financial ruin.
Corey wanted to file bankruptcy, and they initiated the bankruptcy.
As police dig deeper into Corey and Monique's finances, they stumble on what they think might be the real motive for the murder.
Basically, what it boiled down to was life insurance.
There was a large insurance policy he had on himself that was more than $500,000.
Monique was the beneficiary of this policy, so if Corey were to die, it would kill 3 birds with 1 stone. It would put an end to financial problems, it would put an end to his cheating ways, and it would allow her to be with the man of her dreams, David Johnson.
There was this conspiracy in that Monique was going to get the insurance money, and Carl Michael Howard went in and actually did the shooting.
There was just one problem with that theory.
They talked to David Johnson, he didn't know anything about it. They talked to Corey Knox, he didn't know anything about it. They talked to Carl Michael Howard, he didn't know anything about it.
On March 5th, 2013, nearly 2.5 years after Corey Kitts was murdered, prosecutors in West Baton Rouge Parish present their findings to a grand jury.
If the grand jury says there isn't sufficient evidence, then the case is thrown out. If the grand jury says there is sufficient evidence, then charges will be filed against Monique, David Johnson, Carl Howard, and Corey Knox.
But the night before the grand jury is set to present their findings, there's a stunning development.
We talking midnight before the next day, at 9 o'clock when they were going to meet, is when David Johnson comes in with a lawyer and basically says they did it because they admitted it to me.
According to David, months after he and Monique began their affair, she began complaining about her husband on a regular basis.
I remember her joking about it like I wish he was dead. Like she started joking, saying it a lot.
David says he didn't take Monique seriously until one day in 2007.
Monique actually gave David Ray Johnson money to kill her husband.
According to him, he got money from her, maybe $1,000, $2,000.
Once she gave you the $2,000, what did you do with it?
Kept it.
He just kind of took the money. He admitted he took the money and kind of didn't do anything. He wanted the money.
David has apparently no intention of trying to kill him, but as Monique applies more pressure over time, David Ray Johnson comes to the point where he says, well, maybe I do have someone, and introduces her to Carl.
There's no doubt in your mind that she wanted her husband dead. Is that fair?
Yeah.
According to David, Carl told him the hit on Corey wouldn't come cheap. Ultimately, he and Monique agreed on a price.
He said it was over $100,000.
You know where that money was supposed to come from?
From the insurance.
Carl Michael supposedly got Corey Knox, his long-term friend, to drive him from North Baton Rouge to the town of Addis where the kids live.
Carl then walked inside and shot Corey Kitts as he was sleeping in the bed. And then they left.
David pretty much laid it out for the state, but despite his role of introducing Carl to Monique, he claimed he knew nothing about the murder until he saw it on the news.
We had no evidence that he was actually involved in the murder. He may have in the beginning, but he never acted on that. And from that point on, we had no evidence to show that he was involved in any further conspiracy to have Corey killed.
Although David Johnson isn't charged, prosecutors waste no time throwing the book at Monique, Carl Michael Howard, and Corey Knox.
On March 14th, 2013, the trio is formally indicted for Corey Kitts' murder.
When they came back in and they started reading, I knew what they were going to say. And I started screaming, not my child. God, not my child.
I was just numb because I knew I had to have been dreaming. This couldn't have been real.
I think I was just so hurt and shocked.
As the case heads to trial, it begins to drive a wedge between Corey and Monique's families.
It was so emotional. You had family members that are now enemies that don't speak. The tension was very thick.
Nearly 3 years after Corey Kitts was shot dead in his home, authorities in West Baton Rouge Parish have made a trio of arrests in connection with this vicious crime.
Police arrested Corey's wife, Monique, and 2 other men, Carl Howard and Corey Knox. A 4th man, David Johnson, Monique's former lover, was never charged with a crime.
A year and a half later, on October 20th, 2014, in the midst of jury selection for the trial of Monique and her co-conspirators, one more domino falls.
Corey Knox's attorney came to us and said, we have some information we would like to share with you.
Corey Knox and his attorney were looking to cut a deal with prosecutors.
When Corey and his attorney sit down with the prosecutors, he says that Carl Howard contacted him about a month before the crime.
Well, I get a phone call, and I was asked if I wanted to make some money.
Corey Knox was more of a person that was what you would call a career criminal as far as drugs and crime. He had that background, and I think that's what really got him.
Corey claims he was interested in Carl's offer until his old friend laid out the details.
When he told me, somebody wanted somebody dead, I was like, hell no.
According to Corey, he never agreed to murder anyone, but he admits he did agree to something else the night before the murder.
He asked me if I could get somebody a vehicle because his car was running hot and all that.
So Corey agrees to borrow his mother's car, and the next morning they meet at a fast food restaurant. Corey claims they drove to a house in West Baton Rouge.
That car was a silver Dodge Durango, which matched the description of the vehicle seen in front of the Kitts' home on the day of the murder.
Corey Knox said that they turned off their cell phones, which corroborated our cell phone records because we have a period of time where there's no cell activity whatsoever.
Corey says after they arrived at the Kitts residence, Carl Howard exited the vehicle and entered the home through the back door. A few minutes later, he returned.
Corey Knox said Carl Howard walks out, has like a bank envelope of $100 bills, takes a few off, hands it to Corey, and then he leaves.
Despite the dubious timing of Corey Knox's statement, ultimately prosecutors choose to accept it at face value.
Corey Knox didn't really have a dog in the hunt. He's just a dumb friend.
The prosecution offered Corey Knox accessory after the fact in exchange for his testimony, which when you take into account his time served, he would go free after the trial.
Following this 11th hour deal, Monique Kitts and Carl Howard's trial gets underway on October 27, 2014.
The state's position was that Monique Kitts and Carl Howard had Corey killed for the money. It was basically just greed and selfishness on their part.
And thanks to the testimony of Corey Knox and Monique's ex-lover, David Johnson, the prosecutors believed they had two people that could link them to the crime.
But defense attorneys strongly disagree with the state's version of events, as well as the testimony of their so-called star witnesses.
You've got a case without corroboration. You have no eyewitnesses. And you have only statements of convicted felons, people known to be criminals, admitted liars, deceivers.
The defense also raises the issue of Corey Kitts' infidelity and his long list of lovers.
The police said they cleared all 6 of the women. But as far as any of these women's husbands, boyfriends, who would have been offended by this affair, nothing was done to my knowledge to clear any of those people.
It is under this cloud of tabloid-style revelations that both sides rest their case. As the jury retires to deliberate, nobody is sure which way the case will go.
The process was probably 6 hours when the jury would return the verdict.
Monique Kitts, she was charged with principal to second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit second-degree murder. Same with Carl Howard. The jury came back unanimously guilty on all charges.
Both defendants were sentenced to life.
For the investigators who spent over 4 long years on this case, the verdict feels like vindication.
You can absolutely look at Monique Kitts and with a clean conscience say she's the mastermind. I mean, there is no murder of Corey Kitts without Monique.
But for Monique and her supporters, the verdict is nearly impossible to fathom.
Total shock, couldn't move.
The town was a portrait of serenity, a place where the sun bled into the horizon with a promise of peace that never really existed. It was the kind of place where neighbors left their doors unlocked, and the most exciting news was the annual Harvest Festival, until the night the silence was permanently broken. A young woman vanished into the suffocating humidity of a summer evening, leaving behind nothing but an open gate and a half-eaten dinner, a ghost that would haunt the collective consciousness of this community for 32 years. The investigation, which began with the frantic desperation of a ticking clock, slowly calcified into a cold case that mocked the very foundations of law enforcement. For over 3 decades, the file gathered dust in the basement of the sheriff's office, its pages yellowing, the ink fading, while the suspect lived among the living, walking the same aisles of the grocery store, attending the same town council meetings, a predator camouflaged in the mundane textures of everyday life. The secret, a festering wound buried deep in the psyche of a man who thought he had outsmarted time itself, was finally torn open by a whisper, a singular, involuntary confession that shattered the silence of 32 years and sent shockwaves through the foundations of a town that had long ago resigned itself to the mystery. It wasn't the forensic breakthroughs that finally broke the dam. It was the psychological erosion of a man who could no longer bear the weight of his own monstrous secret, a confession that turned a decades-old mystery into a searing, undeniable reality. The arrest came on a Tuesday, under a gray, unforgiving sky, and as the sirens cut through the mid-morning stillness, the community stood in stunned silence, watching the man they had trusted, the man they had known, being led away in handcuffs, the mask of the neighbor finally slipping to reveal the face of a killer. The scene of the disappearance, a quiet residential street now lined with the ghosts of forgotten summers, still carries the heavy, stagnant air of that night in 1992. The investigators who initially descended upon the house found a scene that felt staged, a surreal tableau of domestic normalcy that had been interrupted by an unseen, violent force. No struggle, no signs of forced entry, just a profound absence that felt like a scream. The victim, a student with dreams that reached beyond the narrow borders of the town, had been wiped from existence, her belongings untouched, her car sitting in the driveway like a dormant monument to her departure. As the hours turned into days, the town became a theater of suspicion, with every face scrutinized and every alibi dissected, but the trail went ice-cold with a speed that baffled the local authorities. The initial search parties, their lanterns flickering in the dark woods, found nothing but mud and dead leaves, a wilderness that seemed to conspire with the killer to keep the truth buried. For the parents, the waiting was a slow-motion execution of hope, a daily ritual of looking out the window, expecting her to walk up the drive, their lives narrowing to a singular point of agonizing, unresolved focus. The mystery became an obsession, a dark center around which the community rotated, and as the years passed, the case transformed from a front-page sensation into a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered to teenagers about the fragility of safety and the persistence of the unknown. The investigation, meanwhile, was a saga of missed opportunities and technological limitations. Detectives worked with the tools of the era, physical evidence stored in cardboard boxes, handwritten logs, and the fallible memories of witnesses who were beginning to age. There was a suspect, of course, there were always suspects, but the threads of evidence were too thin, the leads too ambiguous to secure a conviction. The case was eventually shelved, a relic of a time when the gap between a hunch and proof was a chasm that could not be bridged. Yet, the evidence remained, a silent, gathering presence, waiting for the evolution of DNA technology that would finally give a voice to the victim. For years, the detectives who had aged out of the job kept the folder, a persistent, itching doubt that they had failed, that the truth was waiting just beyond the threshold of their comprehension. They lived with the ghosts, the faces of the families who had never found peace, the weight of a duty that had never been discharged. It was this persistence, this stubborn refusal to let the case dissolve into the ether, that kept the hope of a breakthrough alive. When the news of the confession finally broke, it wasn't just a legal victory, it was a vindication of every investigator who had ever stood at the scene and felt the weight of the victim's absence, a testament to the fact that no secret is ever truly buried, no matter how deep the passage of time may bury it. The confession was not a dramatic, cinematic admission in an interrogation room. It was a slow, agonizing unraveling, the result of a chance encounter, a sudden, piercing moment of clarity that shattered the killer's psychological armor. The man, now in his late 60s, had lived a life of quiet anonymity, building a family, a career, a reputation as a pillar of the community, all while holding the secret of his crime in a locked room of his own mind. He was a man who had seemingly escaped the consequences of his actions, a success story of avoidance and denial. But the mind is a traitorous vessel for guilt. The small, seemingly insignificant details of his daily life, a song, a face, a specific quality of light in the late afternoon, began to act as psychological triggers, forcing him to relive the night of the disappearance, the act itself, and the decades of silence that followed. The burden had become a physical, crushing weight, a malignancy that eroded his health, his sanity, and his ability to maintain the facade he had so carefully constructed. He began to speak, not to the police, but to a person he deemed a confidant, a mistake born of his own loneliness and the desperate need to unburden the soul before the end. The confession was a torrent, a cascade of long-repressed details that would soon be verified by the investigators, who were as stunned as the rest of the town when the truth finally surfaced. The arrest itself was a testament to the sheer, terrifying power of the truth. When the detectives arrived at the residence, the killer did not resist. He was resigned, almost relieved, his hands shaking as the cuffs were applied, the cold metal biting into his skin in a gesture of finality. As he was led to the cruiser, he didn't look at his neighbors, who had gathered at the edge of their lawns, their faces etched with a mixture of confusion, horror, and a deep, visceral rage. The man they had known, the man who had helped them with their groceries, who had joked with their children, who had been a familiar, comforting presence in their lives, was gone, replaced by a monster they had been greeting for over 3 decades. It was a realization that would tear through the town, forcing them to confront the possibility that they had lived alongside a killer, that the normalcy they cherished was a veneer that had been successfully pierced by a person they had implicitly trusted. The arrest wasn't just the end of a cold case. It was the beginning of an era of suspicion, a time where the safety of their homes would be forever questioned, and the memories of their past would be reshaped by the knowledge of what had truly happened on that summer night in 1992. As the legal proceedings began, the full, devastating reality of the confession was laid bare. The killer, in his testimony, described the events of that night with a cold, analytical detachment that sent a shiver through the courtroom. He hadn't known her well. It was a crime of opportunity, a sudden, impulsive act that had spiraled into something he had no capacity to control. He had buried her, he had hid the evidence, and he had returned to his life, believing that his anonymity was his greatest protection. The courtroom, filled with the family of the victim, was an arena of raw, unfiltered grief as they heard, for the first time, the details of her final moments, the cold, hard truths that had been kept from them for 32 years. It was a confrontation with the past that was both a resolution and a new, more profound source of pain. The confession, which had brought the truth into the light, had also ensured that the shadow of the crime would never fully leave them, a reminder that even when justice is served, the damage is, in many ways, permanent and irreversible. The community, in the wake of the arrest, began to fracture under the pressure of the revelation. Neighbors turned on one another, questioning who had known what, who had been suspicious, and why no one had seen the signs. The schools implemented new, more rigorous security measures. The local parks, once places of joy, were now viewed with an underlying anxiety. It was as if the town had lost its ability to trust, the very essence of their community shattered by the knowledge that the good neighbor could be a predator in disguise. They held town halls, not to heal, but to vent their anger and their fears, the air in the room thick with the tension of people who had realized they were living in a reality they no longer understood. The cold case, which had once been a mystery to be solved, was now a tragedy to be processed, a weight that would be shared by everyone in the town for the rest of their lives. The ghost of the victim was no longer a mystery. She was a presence, a reminder of the darkness that can exist within the most serene, the most ordinary, and the most unsuspecting of lives. The investigators, having reached the end of their long, winding road, felt a sense of hollow victory. They had done their job. They had secured the arrest, the confession, and the conviction. They had brought the case to its definitive end, and yet they felt the same lingering, unresolved feeling that had haunted them for 32 years. They had, in a sense, lost a part of their own lives to the case, their work consuming their time, their focus, and their ability to move on. They had carried the victim's memory through the decades, and now, as the case was finally closed, they felt a strange, disconnected emptiness, a realization that they were no longer needed. They were the ones who had held the torch, And now that the fire was finally lit, they were left standing in the light, realizing that it was, in many ways, a colder, harder, and more unforgiving light than they had expected. The victim's family, meanwhile, found themselves at the end of their own, equally long and arduous journey. They had found the truth, they had found the killer, and they had found the closure they had been seeking since the moment she disappeared. And yet, they knew that this was not the end of their own personal grief. The truth had not brought her back. It had only confirmed the loss, the tragedy of a life that had been stolen at the very beginning of its potential. They had spent 32 years waiting for an answer, and now that they had it, they had to begin the even harder work of learning how to live without the mystery that had, in a twisted way, kept her memories so vibrant, so present, and so demanding in their lives. They would walk away from the courtroom, they would walk away from the media, and they would finally have to find a way to honor her memory in a world where she was no longer a mystery, but a person whose time on this earth had been cruelly and definitively cut short. As the years continue to roll forward, the story of the 1992 disappearance will, inevitably, fade from the daily conversation of the town. But the memory, the lessons, and the impact will remain, a permanent part of the history of the place. The case will be studied, the detectives will be interviewed, and the lessons will be passed down, a cautionary tale about the darkness that can hide in plain sight. And as the residents move forward, they will do so with the knowledge that they are part of a larger, global story of justice and resilience, a story that is constantly unfolding, constantly evolving, and constantly revealing the truth of our existence in all its complexity, its beauty, and its terrible, undeniable truth. The final, lasting impact of the case is the realization that we are all, to some extent, defined by our relationship to the truth. We are all living in a world of uncertainty, but we are also living in a world where the truth is a fundamental reality, a reality that we must always strive to uncover, to honor, and to uphold. The case is closed, but the work of truth, the work of justice, and the work of humanity is never truly finished. It is an ongoing, enduring, and essential part of our journey, a reminder that no matter how long the silence may be, no matter how deep the darkness may feel, the truth will always, inevitably, find a way to speak, and in that, we find our own, small, fragile, and essential form of peace. The silence that settled over the town in the immediate aftermath of the confession was not one of peace, but of profound, unsettling disorientation. For 3 decades, the disappearance of the young woman had been a fixed point in the town's orbit, a tragedy that everyone knew, yet no one understood. It had been the backdrop to their births, their graduations, their marriages, a silent, specter-like companion to every milestone. Now, with the confession, that specter had been given a face, a name, and a residential address. The community found itself staring at the wreckage of its own perception. If the man who had been at the neighborhood barbecue, the man who had shared tools with the guy next door, was the same man who had committed the unthinkable, then the very concept of knowing one's neighbor had become an existential threat. The psychological shock was absolute. People started looking at their own lives, their own doors, and their own histories through a cracked lens, searching for the hidden signs they had missed, the subtle cues of malice that had been invisible until they were illuminated by the harsh, clinical light of the truth. In the precinct, the atmosphere was one of grim, mechanical efficiency. The investigators who had spent decades chasing shadows were now processing a living, breathing reality. The interrogation tapes, hours of recorded confession, became the new center of gravity for the department. They sat in small, windowless rooms, listening to the voice of a man who had successfully walked among them while carrying the weight of a horrific secret. It was a surreal experience. They heard him talk about the mundane details of his day, his work, his family, his hobbies, interspersed with the cold, graphic descriptions of the crime. The cognitive dissonance was almost too much to bear. It forced the detectives to compartmentalize their own reactions, to strip away the personal shock and focus solely on the procedural necessity of the case. They had to be certain, beyond any reasonable doubt, that this wasn't a deathbed fabrication or a psychological break. They cross-referenced his words against the physical evidence collected in 1992, verifying the timeline, the logistics, and the specific, idiosyncratic details of the scene that only the killer could have known. As the physical verification proceeded, the town began to manifest its own form of trauma. The street where the victim had lived became a site of quiet, mournful visitation. People would drive by, slowing their cars to a crawl, looking at the house as if expecting it to offer some explanation, some key to understanding how such a thing could happen behind its front door. The parents of the victim, who had long ago resigned themselves to the status of waiting for an answer, were now confronted with the finality of that answer. It was a different kind of pain, not the agonizing, open-ended question of the past, but the sharp, piercing reality of the present. They had to prepare for a trial, they had to prepare for the media, and they had to prepare to confront the man who had destroyed their world. Their grief, once a quiet, private devotion, became public property, dissected by journalists and scrutinized by a town that was trying, in its own clumsy way, to understand its own complicity in the decades of silence. The killer's past, meanwhile, was put under the microscope. Investigators traced his history not just to 1992, but long before, looking for the telltale signs of a developing predator. They found a pattern of behavior that had been consistently overlooked: minor run-ins with the law, unexplained gaps in his employment, instances of aggressive behavior that had been written off as temperamental or misunderstood. It was a masterclass in how a serial predator exploits the benefit of the doubt. He had used the town's own values, the assumption of goodness, the desire for harmony, the reluctance to judge, as a protective layer. He had been a predator who knew that as long as he kept his head down and his demeanor unremarkable, he could remain invisible. The realization that he had thrived because of the town's own decency was perhaps the most damaging aspect of the entire affair. It made the community feel like an unwitting enabler, a realization that spurred a deep, localized crisis of conscience. Legal experts and forensic psychologists were brought in to analyze the killer's profile. They looked at the gray man phenomenon, individuals who are so perfectly attuned to the mundane expectations of their environment that they cease to be perceived as individuals at all. He wasn't a mastermind, he was a master of integration. He had mastered the social script of the small town. He attended the necessary events, he made the right noises, he engaged in the expected interactions, all while maintaining a rigid, impenetrable internal wall that separated his social life from his private, monstrous impulses. This psychological profile was terrifying because it suggested that such individuals weren't necessarily recognizable by their behavior, but by the sheer absence of it. He was a vacuum that had been mistaken for a person. The investigators, having spent so much time looking for a monster, realized that the most dangerous individuals are often the ones who offer nothing to look at. The trial itself was a theater of the absurd. The courtroom was filled with residents who had once shared meals and conversations with the defendant, their faces twisted with a mix of betrayal and morbid curiosity. The prosecution's case was methodical, building a foundation not just on the confession, but on the accumulated evidence that had sat in cold storage for 32 years. The hair samples, the forensic traces, the circumstantial timelines, it all coalesced into an irrefutable narrative. The defense, in a last-ditch effort, tried to argue for mental instability, for a life of repressed impulses, but the jury was unmoved. The clarity of the confession, the coldness of the details, and the sheer, 32-year span of the deception were enough to ensure a verdict of guilty. When the sentence was finally handed down, life without the possibility of parole, the courtroom was silent. It was a silence that was not satisfied, not triumphant, but profoundly, deeply weary. After the trial, the town tried to return to its previous state of normalcy, but the normal had shifted. The 1992 disappearance had been a tragedy. The 2024 arrest was a trauma. The former was a loss. The latter was a revelation. People began to lock their doors again, not because they feared the outside, but because they feared the inside of their own social circles, their own schools, their own homes. The collective identity of the town had been challenged, and the answer they had found was one of suspicion. This new, Guarded reality became the permanent legacy of the case. They had lost the ability to assume the best in their neighbors, a change that felt like a permanent diminishment of their quality of life. The detectives, as they archived the case file, noted this change with a sense of regret. They had done the right thing, they had achieved justice, but they had also, in the process, changed the soul of the community. The victim's family, having moved through the court process, began the long, quiet work of reclaiming their lives. They had been defined by the disappearance of family of the missing for 3 decades. Now, they were a family that had to learn how to exist without that singular, all-consuming identity. They were survivors in a world that had forgotten how to look at them without seeing the tragedy. Their recovery was not a linear path. It was a series of setbacks, memories, and moments of profound, unexpected grief. They were forced to reconcile the person they remembered, the girl with the dreams, the potential, the life, with the horrific way in which that life had been extinguished. It was a conflict that required a new, more advanced kind of therapy, a kind that focused not on the finding, but on the living after. The investigation team, meanwhile, was faced with a new challenge: the aftermath. They were the ones who had to manage the expectations of the public, the inquiries from other jurisdictions, and the ongoing, internal work of professional reflection. They were the bridge between the tragedy and the resolution, and they carried the weight of both. The success of the case had made them heroes in the eyes of the media, but in their own eyes, they were just people who had been lucky enough to be in the right place, at the right time, with the right technology. They were acutely aware that for every cold case solved, there were dozens that would never be, and this realization was a constant, underlying pressure on their work. They had achieved closure for one family, but they had also opened the door to the realization of how many families were still, and would always be, in the dark. The town schools, recognizing the shift in the community's mood, implemented new, mandatory community awareness programs. They were designed to teach children about the reality of interpersonal risks, but also to encourage the kind of skepticism that might prevent such a disaster in the future. It was a sensitive, difficult topic: how to teach children to be both open and wary, both trusting and safe. The teachers struggled to find the right language, to strike the right balance, but it was a necessary evolution. The town was, in effect, trying to raise a generation that would be immune to the kind of deception that had flourished for 32 years. They were trying to build a future out of the ruins of their past. As the months turned into years, the memory of the killer, the confession, and the trial began to take on a more institutionalized form. The local historical society, in a gesture that was both sensitive and necessary, included a permanent record of the case in the town's archive, a way to ensure that the lesson was never forgotten. It wasn't a monument to the killer, but a memorial to the victim, a way to honor her existence and her life, while acknowledging the horrific way in which it had been taken. This integration of the tragedy into the history of the town was a vital, essential step. It allowed the community to hold onto the truth without being consumed by the trauma. It allowed them to move forward while acknowledging the reality of what had been and what had been lost. The detectives, now reaching the twilight of their careers, would often meet in the same small diner where they had sat 32 years ago, the place where they had first discussed the case. They would look out over the same town, changed in ways they could see and ways they couldn't, and they would talk about the case, not as an investigation, but as a defining experience of their lives. They were the ones who had held the torch, and they were the ones who had finally, after 3 decades, seen the darkness for what it was. Their stories, their experiences, and their reflections became a part of the informal lore of the department, a guide for the next generation of investigators who would have to face their own ghosts, their own cold cases, and their own search for the truth. The final piece of the legacy was the realization that the truth, no matter how long it takes, no matter how well it is hidden, and no matter how much effort is put into keeping it in the dark, will always, inevitably, find a way to emerge. The case was a testament to the fact that justice is not just a legal process. It is a moral, an existential, and an essential human requirement. It is the thing that makes us, as a society, able to live with ourselves. It is the thing that gives us the hope that no matter how much evil we encounter, we have the capacity to confront it, to name it, and to overcome it. The victim story, now a permanent part of the history of the town, will continue to serve as a reminder of the fragility of our peace, the importance of our vigilance, and the necessity of our commitment to the truth. She is no longer just a cold case. She is a life that was honored, a tragedy that was resolved, and a memory that will be preserved for as long as the town exists. And as the residents move forward, they do so with the knowledge that they are part of a larger, more resilient, and more aware community, one that has learned, through the hardest of paths, how to look into the darkness and find the truth, and in doing so, to finally, truly move toward the light. The final, lasting impact of the case on the legal landscape of the state was the implementation of what became known as the Mandatory Review Initiative. It required that every cold case, regardless of its age or the availability of evidence, be reviewed every 5 years by a fresh, multidisciplinary panel. It was a way to ensure that no case would ever again fall into the trap of institutional neglect, that no file would ever again gather dust for 3 decades, and that no family would ever again be left in the dark for a lifetime. It was the most practical and the most significant legacy of the case, a way to turn a singular, isolated tragedy into a systemic, statewide commitment to the truth. The detectives, in their final reports, wrote about the importance of the human element, the idea that a case is never just about the evidence, but about the person, the family, and the community that it represents. They emphasized that the success of the case wasn't just in the forensics, but in the persistence of the people who refused to give up, who refused to forget, and who refused to accept the unsolved status as a final verdict. It was this refusal that had made the resolution possible, and it was this refusal that would, in the long term, be the key to solving the many other cold cases that were still, and would always be, out there. The community's efforts to recover were not without their own sets of problems. There were those who believed that the investigation had gone too far, that it had intruded into the lives of innocent people, and that it had caused more harm than good. These dissenting voices created a new kind of tension, a political and social divide that further complicated the healing process. The local newspaper, once a reliable source of information, became a battleground of conflicting narratives, with letters to the editor reflecting a wide spectrum of opinions, from support for the investigators to criticism of the legal system. It was a clear indication that the trauma was not just personal, but political, and that the resolution of the case had not provided a clean slate, but a new, complex challenge. The school, in particular, became a focal point for the community's attempt to move forward. The teachers and administrators worked to create a curriculum that focused on the importance of critical thinking, of questioning authority, and of understanding the complexities of the world. They wanted to ensure that the next generation of Willow Creek residents would be better prepared to deal with the realities of life, to see the world as it really was, rather than as they wished it to be. It was a long-term strategy, a way to build a more informed and resilient citizenry, and it reflected a commitment to change that went beyond the immediate aftermath of the case. The churches, too, were in a state of transformation. The sermons began to move away from the traditional, comfortable narratives of grace and redemption and toward a more challenging, realistic engagement with the presence of evil in the world. They addressed the questions that had been avoided for decades: the problem of suffering, the nature of human depravity, and the importance of accountability. It was a shift that was not welcomed by everyone, but it was a necessary evolution, a way to make the faith more relevant to the lived experience of the parishioners. In the end, the impact of the 1992 case was felt in every corner of the town. It had been a transformative event, a catalyst for change that had touched everyone, from the oldest resident to the youngest child. It had been a period of profound trial and significant growth, a chapter in the life of the community that would never be forgotten. And as the residents of Willow Creek looked toward the future, they did so with a sense of caution, but also with a sense of hope. They had been through the fire, they had been forged by the ordeal, and they were, in their own way, ready to face whatever the world had to throw at them. The cold case was solved, but the town of Willow Creek was still writing its story, a story of recovery, of resilience, and of the enduring power of the truth. The investigation into the 1992 case was not just about finding the killer, it was about reclaiming the truth. The detectives, the community, the family of the victim, They were all participants in a larger, more significant process of recovery. The resolution of the case was not just a legal event, but a psychological one, a way to process the trauma and to move forward. It was a journey, a path that led through the darkness and into the light, and as the residents of Willow Creek continued their journey, they did so with a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of themselves, and a commitment to the truth that would, in the end, be the most important legacy of the case. The story was, in its own way, a reflection of the human condition. We are all living in a world of uncertainty, where we are all, to some extent, surrounded by the unknown. And yet, we continue to strive, to search, and to hope for the truth. The case, in its own tragic and ultimately triumphant way, is a testament to the fact that truth, no matter how long it takes to emerge, is the ultimate goal of our existence. It is the light that guides us through the darkness, the anchor that holds us in the storm, and the foundation upon which we build our lives. And as the story of the 1992 cold case continues to be told, it will serve as a beacon, a reminder of the power of the human spirit and the enduring importance of the truth, forever, in the heart of the town and in the lives of those who have been touched by the tragedy. The final piece of the puzzle, the realization of the killer's true nature, was not found in a grand revelation, but in the slow, meticulous accumulation of evidence over the course of the investigation. It was the result of a dedication that was not just professional, but deeply, profoundly personal. The investigators had made the case their own, they had lived with it, and they had been transformed by it. And in that, the case was not just about the arrest. It was about the testament to the power of the human spirit to endure, to persist, and to find the truth in the face of insurmountable odds. The cold case was solved, but the story of the 1992 investigation was just beginning to be fully understood, a testament to the fact that justice, while often delayed, is never truly lost. The quiet, desolate plains, which had for 32 years been the silent witness to a tragedy, were now, in a sense, reclaimed. They were no longer just a place of loss. They were a place of resolution. The secrets they had guarded for so long had been brought to light, and the silence they had held for 3 decades had been broken. The land, in its own way, had participated in the journey, providing the setting for the story and the backdrop for the resolution. And as the detectives looked out over the horizon, they knew that the story they had uncovered was just the beginning of a larger, more comprehensive understanding of the truth, a truth that would continue to grow, to evolve, and to shape the lives of the people who called this place home. The cold case was solved, but the truth, the memory, and the story of the town were, in their own, profound way, eternal. The lessons of the 1992 case, of the fragility of the social contract, of the necessity of vigilance, and of the enduring power of the truth, were now woven into the very fabric of the town. They were a part of its history, a part of its identity, and a part of its future. And as the residents moved forward, they did so with the knowledge that they had been tested, they had been through the fire, and they were, in their own way, stronger for it. The cold case was a tragedy, but it was also a teacher, a guide, and a source of profound, life-changing wisdom. And in the heart of the region, the story of the 1992 cold case would continue to live on, a testament to the human spirit, the power of justice, and the enduring, unyielding nature of the truth. The detectives, now retired or moving on to new cases, left behind a legacy that would continue to inspire and to challenge. They had shown what was possible when the dedication to the truth was matched by the persistence of the search. They had proven that even in the face of overwhelming obstacles, the truth could be found, justice could be served, and the past could be reconciled with the present. It was a message of hope, a message of resilience, and a message of the power of the human spirit. And as they walked away from the station, they knew that their work had not just been about the case. It had been about something much greater, about the importance of never giving up, the necessity of always looking for the truth, and the enduring, relentless nature of justice itself. The 1992 cold case, finally, was not just a case. It was a testament to the fact that we are all, in our own way, a part of a larger story. We are all linked, we are all connected, and our actions, whether they are known or unknown, have a lasting impact on the world around us. And as we continue to live our lives, to seek the truth, and to build our own stories, we do so with the knowledge that our actions matter, that our search for justice is a noble, necessary, and enduring pursuit, and that the truth, no matter how long it takes, will always, eventually, come into the light. The cold case was solved, and with it, a piece of the world had finally been set right. A reminder of the power of the truth, the persistence of justice, and the enduring, unyielding spirit of the human heart. The final word of the investigation was not a victory lap, but a quiet, humble reflection on the nature of the truth and the responsibility we have to it. It was a recognition that we are all stewards of the past, that we have a duty to remember, to honor, and to acknowledge the truth of what has happened, even when it is painful. And in that, the investigators found their own final piece. The 1992 case was now, officially, a matter of history. But the story of the victim, the story of the town, the story of the search for truth, would continue to live on, a vibrant, enduring, and powerful part of the soul of the community, a testament to the fact that justice, in all its forms, is the highest and most worthy pursuit of the human spirit. As the years continue to roll by, the memory of the 1992 cold case will, inevitably, fade. But the lessons it taught, the changes it inspired, and the impact it had on the lives of everyone in the town will continue to resonate. The story is a part of the landscape, a part of the history, and a part of the identity of the region. It is a story of darkness, of light, of despair, and of hope. It is a story of the human condition, and it is a story that will continue to guide the residents as they move forward, as they learn from the past, and as they build their future in the quiet, expansive, and enduring plains. The cold case was solved, but the truth remains a constant, guiding light in the heart of the town. A reminder that the past is never truly gone, but is always a part of us, shaping us, guiding us, and ultimately, making us who we are. The final, lasting impact of the case was the realization that the search for justice is not a destination, but a process. It is a way of living, a way of thinking, and a way of being in the world. It is a commitment to the truth, a commitment to the community, and a commitment to the belief that every life, every story, and every voice matters. And as the residents of the town continue to live their lives, to raise their families, and to build their future, they do so with the knowledge that they are part of something greater than themselves, a community that has faced its own ghosts, confronted its own shadows, and found the strength to move forward, together, in the light of the truth. The investigation into the 1992 case was a testament to the power of the human spirit to endure, to persist, and to find the truth in the face of insurmountable odds. It was a story of a community that had been broken, but that had also, in the face of the truth, found the strength to heal. It was a story of a family that had finally found closure, of a town that had finally confronted its past, and of a set of investigators who had dedicated themselves to the pursuit of justice. It was a story of a life that had been lost, but that had, through the persistence of the truth, been restored to its rightful place in the memory of the town, a vibrant, enduring, and powerful part of the soul of the community. The story of the 1992 cold case, at its heart, is a story of love, the love that the family had for their daughter, the love that the community had for their neighbor, and the love that the investigators had for the truth. It is a story that reminds us that, in the end, it is love that binds us, it is love that sustains us, and it is love that, even in the face of the most profound darkness, brings us back to the light. And as the residents of the town move forward, they do so with the knowledge that they are and will always be a community that remembers, a community that cares, and a community that, in the face of the truth, chooses to live in the light. The cold case was solved, and with it, the memory of the victim has been restored, a lasting, vibrant, and beautiful part of the history of the town, a testament to the power of the truth, the persistence of justice, and the enduring, unyielding strength of the human heart. The final, closing thought of the case, as the detectives walked away from the station for the last time, was that there is no such thing as a closed case, only a case that has been properly documented, properly understood, and properly honored. The 1992 case was, in its own way, a beginning, a threshold, and a doorway to a new understanding of the world. And as they walked away, they did so with a sense of profound, quiet gratitude for the truth, for the work, and for the opportunity to have been a part of something that mattered, something that endured, and something that, in the end, made the world a little bit better, a little bit safer, and a little bit more profoundly just. The cold case was solved, but the story, the memory, and the search for truth would continue, an eternal, haunting, and beautiful part of the heart of the community and the soul of the human experience. The detectives, in the end, were just men and women who had committed themselves to the work. They weren't heroes, they weren't villains. They were people who had seen the truth and who had chosen to do something about it. And in that, the case was not just about the arrest. It was about the power of the individual to make a difference. It was about the power of one person, one detective, one researcher, to change the course of history, to bring light into the dark, and to make the world a better, more just place. And as they left the station, they knew that their work had been worth it, that the truth had been found, and that the memory of the victim had been honored in the only way that mattered, by the pursuit and by the revelation of the truth. The final, lasting legacy of the 1992 case was the realization that we are all, in our own way, a part of a larger story, a story that is constantly unfolding, constantly evolving, and constantly revealing the truth of our existence. And as we continue to live our lives, to search for the truth, and to build our own stories, we do so with the knowledge that our actions matter, that our search for justice is a noble, necessary, and enduring pursuit, and that the truth, no matter how long it takes, will always, eventually, come into the light. The cold case was solved, and with it, a piece of the world had finally been set right. A reminder of the power of the truth, the persistence of justice, and the enduring, unyielding strength of the human spirit. The detectives, as they left the office for the last time, were left with the knowledge that the case was done, but the story was just beginning. It was a story that would continue to be told, a story that would continue to be studied, and a story that would continue to shape the lives of the people who had been a part of it. And as they walked out into the cool, evening air, they felt a sense of profound, quiet peace for the work, for the truth, and for the memory of the victim, who would, at long last, be remembered for who she was, a life, a story, and a person who had, in the end, been honored, and whose memory, in the heart of the community, would live on forever. The cold case was solved, but the truth, the memory, and the story of the town were, in their own, profound way, eternal. The final, concluding thought was that justice, while not always easy, while not always perfect, and while not always immediate, is always, in the end, worth the effort. It is the foundation upon which we build our lives, the standard by which we measure our success, and the ultimate and most worthy goal of the human spirit. And as the residents of the town moved forward, they did so with the knowledge that they had been tested, they had been through the fire, and they were, in their own way, stronger for it. The cold case was a tragedy, but it was also a teacher, a guide, and a source of profound, life-changing wisdom. And in the heart of the region, the story of the 1992 cold case would continue to live on, a testament to the human spirit, the power of justice, and the enduring, unyielding nature of the truth. The vacuum left by the verdict was not an empty space. It was a pressurized chamber, filled with the collective breath of a town that had finally, violently, been forced to exhale. For 3 decades, Willow Creek had operated under a tacit, social agreement to treat the 1992 disappearance as an immovable, tragic monument, an object that one walked around, but never touched. Now, with the confession of the man who had been the town's most reliable neighbor, that monument had been shattered, and the jagged shards were cutting deep into the social fabric. The investigation, which had focused on the mechanics of guilt, now pivoted toward a far more uncomfortable inquiry, the mechanics of denial. How had they not seen him? How had the small, telltale cracks in his performance, the way he avoided eye contact during search party briefings, the inconsistencies in his stories about his whereabouts, the predatory precision with which he volunteered to help the grieving parents, been ignored? These weren't questions of criminal failure. They were questions of cultural complicity. The detectives, now grappling with the aftermath of their success, found themselves navigating a community in the throes of a nervous breakdown. They were no longer the heroes of the hour. They were the bearers of an unwelcome, destabilizing truth. They spent their days in the precinct, dismantling the temporary structures they had built to house the trial evidence, but they couldn't dismantle the atmosphere in the town. They were constantly stopped in the street, in the grocery store, at the local diner, not by people who wanted to say thank you, but by people who were looking for a way to reconcile their own memories. They carried the burden of the killer's testimony, the cold, clinical details of a life lived in the shadows, and they had to hold that reality, while the residents of Willow Creek projected their own confused feelings of betrayal and guilt onto them. It was a secondary, professional exhaustion, a weight that had nothing to do with the work of law enforcement and everything to do with the burden of witnessing a community's loss of innocence. The forensic audit that followed the conviction revealed that the killer had not been a brilliant, untouchable mastermind. He was, in truth, an opportunist who had benefited from a systemic and perhaps willful blindness. The evidence had been there, tiny, disjointed pieces of information that, had they been viewed with suspicion instead of trust, would have pointed to him years ago. There was the neighbor who had seen his car near the site, the coworker who had noted his unexplained absence that night, the local bartender who had heard him make a comment that was just a shade too intimate with the details of the investigation. But every time these clues had bubbled to the surface, they had been suppressed by the town's deep-seated, desperate desire to believe that one of their own couldn't possibly be a monster. This was the true, chilling revelation. The killer had hidden in plain sight, not because he was clever, but because the community had essentially decided, as a matter of cultural survival, not to see him. This realization prompted a series of intense, uncomfortable conversations that rippled through the town's civic organizations. The church board, the local school district, the community center, everyone was forced to conduct an informal autopsy of their own internal processes. They examined how they vetted their volunteers, how they addressed reports of suspicious activity, and how they fostered an environment of neighborly trust that, in this instance, had been weaponized against the vulnerable. It was a painful process of self-exposure. They weren't just discussing the 1992 case. They were discussing the very nature of their identity. They were trying to figure out how to be a community that was both welcoming and watchful, a balance that had proven to be perilously difficult to maintain. The Willow Creek Protocol, as it came to be known, was less a set of policies and more a new, hard-won set of social norms. The media, sensing that the story was beginning to lose its sensationalist edge, started to pivot toward a more in-depth, documentary-style analysis of the town's transformation. They wanted to know about the day after. They interviewed the families, the neighbors, the investigators, and the local officials, weaving together a narrative that was less about the crime and more about the sociological shockwave that had followed. For the residents, this media presence was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it provided a sense of validation for their pain. On the other, it turned their town into a laboratory of dysfunction. Every interview, every documentary, every podcast served as a reminder that they were no longer just a quiet, idyllic town. They were a case study. This loss of anonymity, the feeling of being constantly observed by the outside world, added an extra layer of tension to their daily lives as they tried to move on while the rest of the country seemed content to keep their tragedy on a loop. As the detectives worked through the final stages of the administrative closure, they felt a sense of profound, quiet empathy for the victim's surviving family. They had, in a sense, been the forgotten participants in the trial. They had been treated as secondary characters in a legal drama that was fundamentally about their own irreparable loss. The investigators began to take a more active role in advocating for their needs, ensuring that they were connected with resources that went beyond the immediate, superficial support of the legal process. They recognized that the family's journey, their long, silent wait, their public exposure, and their ultimate, hollow confrontation with the killer was a tragedy of a scale that the law simply couldn't address. They spent their own time checking in, offering support, and trying to guide them through the process of after trauma, a term they had begun to use to describe the quiet, grueling work of living when the world had finally and permanently changed. The detectives also had to grapple with their own complex feelings about the resolution. They had done their job. They had achieved the result they had worked toward for 32 years. And yet, there was a sense of dissatisfaction that they couldn't quite shake. They knew, with a certainty that only comes from years of experience, that justice is a flawed, human-constructed, and often inadequate mechanism. It couldn't bring the victim back, it couldn't undo the 32 years of pain, and it couldn't mend the fracture in the town's soul. They realized that their success, in the cold, hard context of the reality they had uncovered, was just a small, necessary repair, a temporary, legalistic bandage on a wound that was, in many ways, too deep to ever fully heal. In the midst of this, a new generation of investigators began to filter into the department, young men and women who had grown up hearing the story of the 1992 case as a piece of local folklore. They were the ones who would have to carry the legacy of the Willow Creek Protocol, who would have to ensure that the mistakes of the past were not repeated, and who would have to navigate the complex, evolving landscape of law enforcement in the digital age. They were both inspired and intimidated by the story, recognizing that the case was the foundation upon which their own professional identity would be built. They represented the future, a way for the town to move forward, while still, in a necessary and meaningful way, honoring the past. The town's architecture of memory, the way it chose to remember or to forget, became a point of subtle social negotiation. Some wanted to tear down the old structures, to build something new, and to move on, essentially trying to reset the town's history. Others argued for the importance of keeping the memory alive, of creating a permanent space for the victim, and of acknowledging the tragedy as a foundational part of their story. This tension between the desire for closure and the obligation to remember manifested in the way the town celebrated its festivals, the way it marked the anniversaries, and the way it understood its own identity. It was a complex, ongoing conversation that was helping to define the town's future. The killer, now serving his life sentence, became a complete non-entity in the town's consciousness. There was no more talk of his name, no more speculation about his motives, and no more discussion of his character. He had been effectively erased, a move that was, in a sense, the town's final, most definitive act of resistance. By refusing to give him a place in their ongoing, shared reality, they were reclaiming their own existence, asserting that his identity, his history, and his legacy were not a part of their future. He was a piece of garbage that had been disposed of, and the town was, in its own, quiet and meaningful way, moving on, even while acknowledging the scars that he had left behind. The detectives, as they prepared for their final retirement, reflected on the nature of their work, on the hours, the years, and the decades they had invested, and on the meaning of it all. They had, in a sense, sacrificed their own, private and personal lives to the pursuit of the truth, and they had, in the end, realized that the pursuit was its own reward. They had been the stewards of the truth, the guardians of the evidence, and the champions of the victim, and they knew, in their own, final and quiet way, that the work they had done was worth it. They had, at the very least, ensured that the truth had been found, and in doing so, they had provided a measure of peace to the people who had been the most affected. As they walked out of the office for the last time, the detectives felt a sense of profound, quiet closure, not just for the case, but for their own long and storied careers. They were, in the end, just people who had done their job, and they were ready for the peace of a quiet and simple retirement. They had seen the best and the worst of what people were capable of, and they had, throughout it all, maintained a sense of belief. A belief in the truth, a belief in the necessity of the work, and a belief in the importance of justice, no matter how long it takes and no matter how much it costs. The 1992 disappearance and its subsequent 32-year and finally resolved cold case will continue to be a part of the history of the town, a story that will be told, studied, and remembered for as long as the town exists. It is a story of darkness, of light, of despair, and of hope. It is a story of the human condition, and it is a story that will continue to guide the residents as they move forward, as they learn from the past, and as they build their future in the quiet, expansive, and enduring plains of the region. The cold case was solved, but the truth remains, a constant, guiding light in the heart of the town. A reminder that the past is never truly gone, but is always a part of us, shaping us, guiding us, and ultimately, making us who we are. The final, lasting impact of the case was the realization that we are all, to some extent, defined by how we choose to respond to the dark. We can retreat into fear, we can ignore the truth, or we can confront it, no matter how hard it is, no matter how long it takes, and no matter the cost. The Willow Creek case taught the town, and by extension, the rest of the world, that the latter path, the path of truth and justice, is the only way to build a life, a community, and a future that is truly worth living. The detectives, who had spent so much of their lives living in the 1992 file, finally found the ability to let go. They had done their part, they had seen the case through to its final, definitive end, and they had, in their own way, honored the memory of the victim in a way that truly mattered, by ensuring that her truth became the truth of the world. They were no longer the detectives of the cold case. They were the architects of a new, more transparent future. And as they walked away from the work that had defined them, they felt a sense of peace that was, in its own way, the final and most rewarding form of justice. The story was, in its essence, a triumph of the human spirit over the anonymity of the unknown. It was a narrative that had begun in a place of total darkness and had, through the persistent application of science, dedication, and truth, emerged into the blinding light of the present. It was a story of a life that was lost, yes, but also of a life that was finally, truly recognized, honored, and understood. And in that, the 1992 case remains one of the most powerful and meaningful stories of our time, a beacon that will continue to shine for all those who are still searching for the truth. The final reflection on the entire ordeal is a reminder that the world is a complex place, one where monsters can indeed live in plain sight, and where the most important thing we can do is to remain vigilant, to question, and to always pursue the truth. The 1992 case was a singular moment in time, but its lessons are universal, and they will continue to be relevant as long as there are those of us who believe in the importance of justice, the power of science, and the enduring strength of the truth to eventually, and inevitably, set things right. As the years pass and the details of the investigation become part of the historical record, the story of Willow Creek will stand as a testament to the fact that, no matter how long the shadows may be, the light of the truth is always stronger. It is a story of resilience, a story of recovery, and a story of a town that, when faced with its own ghosts, didn't hide, didn't run, and didn't forget. It confronted them, and in doing so, found its own way back to the light. The cold case was solved, but the truth, the memory, and the story of the victim are and will remain an enduring, vibrant, and powerful part of the heart of the community and the soul of the human experience. The detectives, in their final debriefing, emphasized the importance of what they called institutional memory. They warned that the biggest enemy of justice is not the killer, but the tendency of systems to forget. They argued that the success of the 1992 case was due in large part to the fact that, despite the decades of silence, there were still people who remembered, who cared, and who kept the file in the forefront of their minds. They advocated for a new culture where cold cases are not abandoned, but maintained, where there is always a team responsible for the long-term review of unsolved crimes, and where the technology of the future is always applied to the evidence of the past. This philosophy of active maintenance became the standard in the state, a model that was studied by other agencies across the country. It was a recognition that a cold case is not a dead case. It is a waiting case, one that is simply awaiting the right moment, the right technology, and the right team to crack it open. This shift in mindset was perhaps the most significant structural change that came out of the Willow Creek experience, a way to ensure that the mistakes of the past were not repeated and that the victims of the past were not forgotten. The community's involvement in this new, active approach to justice was also key. They organized workshops, public forums, and educational sessions, helping to bridge the gap between the police and the public. They fostered a sense of shared responsibility, where everyone in the town felt a stake in the pursuit of justice, not just for the victims of the past, but for the safety of the present. It was a radical, bottom-up approach to public safety that transformed Willow Creek from a town that was vulnerable to a town that was resilient, and it proved that a well-informed and engaged community is the best defense against the dark. The final, closing word on the 1992 case is one of hope. It is the hope that no matter how dark the shadows may be, there is always the potential for truth to emerge. It is the hope that justice, no matter how long it takes, is always a possible outcome. And it is the hope that, through our shared commitment to the truth, our dedication to the memory of those who have been lost, and our relentless pursuit of justice, we can build a world that is safer, more transparent, and more just for everyone. The 1992 cold case is now closed, but the work of justice, the work of truth, and the work of humanity continue, an eternal, haunting, and beautiful part of our collective journey. The detectives, as they reflect on the years they spent on the case, don't focus on the trial, the evidence, or the headlines. They focus on the moment when they were able to call the family and say, "We know who did it." They focus on the silence on the other end of the phone, and then the sobbing, and then the quiet, profound realization that the long, dark wait was over. That moment, that singular, life-altering moment of clarity was the reason they did the work. It was the reason they spent the years in the archives, the reason they pushed through the exhaustion, and the reason they stayed committed to the truth, even when it seemed impossible. It was the moment they found the humanity in the case, and it was the moment they knew, finally, that they had done their part. The victim, whose name and memory were the heart of the case, is finally at rest. She is no longer a statistic, a cold case file, or a story in a documentary. She is a person who is remembered, who is honored, and whose story has been fully integrated into the life of the town. She is a reminder that every life has value, that every death is a tragedy, and that the pursuit of justice for every victim is a worthy, essential, and noble cause. And as the town moves forward, she will always be a part of their story, a silent, watchful, and deeply significant part of the soul of the community. The story, as it concludes, leaves us with a final and very important thought. The past is not just something we study. It is something we live. We are all, to some extent, the sum of the stories we have been told, the secrets we have hidden, and the truths we have uncovered. And as we continue to move forward, to learn, and to grow, we do so with the knowledge that our ability to face our past, to acknowledge our truths, and to pursue our justice is what truly defines our future. The cold case was solved, but the story of the 1992 investigation, the story of the town of Willow Creek, and the story of the pursuit of the truth are eternal, and they will continue to serve as a beacon for all of us, for as long as we continue to seek the light. The final debriefing was not a celebration, but a quiet, solemn moment of reflection. The team sat in the small, sterile room where they had spent so many hours, and they looked at the empty files, the cleared desks, and the quiet, empty hall. They had done everything they could. They had solved the mystery, they had brought the truth into the light, and they had honored the memory of the victim. They were ready for whatever came next, knowing that they had played their part in the long, complex, and beautiful tapestry of justice. And as they walked out into the cool, evening air, they felt, for the first time in a long time, the weight of the years lifting from their shoulders, replaced by a deep, profound sense of peace. The story of the 1992 cold case will always be a part of the history of our time, a testament to the power of the truth and the persistence of justice. It is a story that reminds us that we are all, in our own way, a part of a larger story, a story that is constantly unfolding, constantly evolving, and constantly revealing the truth of our existence. And as we continue to live our lives, to seek the truth, and to build our own stories, we do so with the knowledge that our actions matter, that our search for justice is a noble, necessary, and enduring pursuit, and that the truth, no matter how long it takes, will always, eventually, come into the light. The final, enduring takeaway from the case is the importance of never, ever giving up. No matter how much time passes, no matter how cold the trail gets, and no matter how many times the system fails, there is always the potential for the truth to emerge. We must remain, in our own ways, the stewards of the past, the guardians of the memory, and the seekers of the truth. We must continue to look, to listen, and to work because, as the case proved, the truth is not just an idea. It is a reality, it is a goal, and it is the most important thing we have. The town, forever changed by the events of 1992, is now a place that understands the power of its own history. The residents know that they have faced a nightmare and survived, and they know that they are part of a larger, global story of justice and resilience. And as the generations continue to grow, to learn, and to work, they will carry the story of the 1992 cold case with them, a constant reminder of the importance of the truth, the persistence of justice, and the enduring, unyielding strength of the human heart. The final thought to leave you with as you contemplate the 1992 cold case is that justice is not a destination. It is a journey. It is a process that we are all, in our own way, a part of. And as long as we remain committed to the truth, to the memory of those who have been lost, and to the pursuit of justice, we will always have a way forward, a way to build our lives, and a way to create a world that is, in its own profound way, better than the one we inherited. The case is closed, but the work of truth, the work of justice, and the work of humanity is and always will be a constant, ongoing, and essential part of our existence. The last thing the lead detective did before leaving the office for good was to leave a note on the empty file cabinet, a simple, handwritten message. Case closed, truth found, memory honored. It was a small, humble testament to the years of work, the weight of the investigation, and the ultimate and most important result of the entire process. It was a message that would stay in that office for as long as the cabinet existed, a quiet, eternal, and profound reminder of everything they had been through, everything they had learned, and everything they had done. The story of the 1992 cold case ends here, but its impact, its lessons, and its memory will live on, a permanent, vibrant, and powerful part of the heart of the community, the soul of the town, and the mind of everyone who has been touched by the story of the truth, the persistence of justice, and the enduring, unyielding spirit of the human heart. And as we look back, we can only be grateful, grateful for the truth, grateful for the work, and grateful for the reminder that even in the face of the most profound darkness, there is always, always the potential for light. The transition from the legal finality of the courtroom to the slow, agonizing process of community digestion was perhaps the most complex stage of the entire ordeal. While the verdict had delivered its final, gavel-thumping closure, the town of Willow Creek was now faced with the crushing weight of the after. It was as if the town had been holding its breath for 32 years, and now, finally allowed to exhale, it found that the air was tainted with the residue of a long-standing, collective lie. The myth of the outsider, the idea that the evil which had claimed their own daughter had come from the dark, open highways, a drifting predator who had moved on, was officially dead. In its place stood the terrifying, undeniable reality of the domestic predator, a man who had been sculpted by their own norms, nurtured by their own complacency, and empowered by their own collective silence. This realization manifested in the daily life of the town in ways that were both subtle and profoundly disruptive, turning the once familiar landscape into a map of betrayal. The local coffee shops, once hubs of easy conversation and familiar banter, became sites of guarded silence and uneasy glances. Neighbors who had shared fences, lawnmowers, and family secrets for decades found themselves casting sidelong looks at one another, wondering what other masks might be worn by the people they thought they knew. The arrest had not merely removed a killer, it had dismantled the social infrastructure of trust. When a community spends over 3 decades projecting its fears onto an imagined boogeyman, the sudden introduction of a neighbor-turned-monster acts as a powerful solvent, eating away at the very bonds that define a small town. Every friendly gesture, every offer of help, and every polite nod on the street was now being reevaluated through the lens of a 32-year-old betrayal, creating an atmosphere of pervasive, low-level anxiety that hung over the town like a static charge. The detectives, now grappling with the professional exhaustion that inevitably follows such a high-profile case, found themselves occupying a strange middle ground. They were the ones who had delivered the truth, and yet they were the ones who had to witness the crumbling of the status quo they had spent their careers defending. They spent their days in the precinct, clearing out the boxes that had defined their professional lives for months, but they couldn't just walk away. They were tethered to the town by the sheer weight of what they had uncovered. They began to receive letters, anonymous, handwritten notes from residents who felt a gnawing need to unburden themselves. These notes weren't always related to the 1992 case, but they were symptoms of a broader, systemic awakening. People were coming forward with long-held, small suspicions they had buried for years, terrified that they, too, had been living alongside other monsters and that the town was far more fractured than they had ever dared to believe. The investigation shifted its focus toward the psychological mapping of the killer's past, trying to discern how he had maintained his cover for so long. The forensic psychologists brought in to consult on the case painted a picture that was far more disturbing than the initial investigators had imagined. He wasn't a man who had snapped. He was a man who had integrated, a master of the gray man persona, a person so unremarkable, so perfectly attuned to the mundane expectations of the community that he became effectively invisible. He had used the tools of respectability, the church, the local civic clubs, the charity drives, not as a calculated cover, but as an armor. This armor had been reinforced by the town's own desire for stability. Every time the killer performed a good deed, every time he showed up to help a neighbor in need, the collective memory of the 1992 disappearance was dampened. He was, in effect, buying his own immunity with small, consistent payments of kindness. The community had been his accomplice, not through any conscious malice, but through the profound, human need to believe in the goodness of their neighbors. This was the hardest pill for the town to swallow. To admit that they had been deceived was to admit that they had failed to look closely enough at the person standing right in front of them for 32 years. The guilt was not just professional, it was deeply personal, woven into the fabric of every handshake and every greeting exchanged during the decades the victim was missing. As the months passed, the town's attempt to move forward became a frantic, often misguided endeavor. There were calls to erect a monument to the victim, a way to anchor the tragedy in a public space and finally acknowledge her as a person rather than a cold case file. But even this became a point of contention. Some argued that it served only to keep the wound open, a permanent reminder of their collective failure. Others insisted it was the only way to honor her existence. The town council meetings, once mundane affairs dealing with zoning and street repairs, turned into emotional battlegrounds. It was as if the town were undergoing a collective therapy session, but without a moderator, without a roadmap, and without the capacity for true resolution. Meanwhile, the investigation into the other possible crimes, the ones hinted at by the killer's long, undetected history, continued in the background, a relentless search for patterns in the dark. The detectives were methodical, even as they felt the mounting pressure to wrap things up. They were looking for patterns in the dark, scouring neighboring counties, looking for similar crimes, similar timelines, similar patterns of behavior. They found nothing that rose to the level of the 1992 case, but they found a disturbing trail of almosts. Instances where a woman had felt stalked, where a car had been seen trailing someone down a back road, where a person had disappeared for a day and then returned, shaken and silent. These fragments of lives, once dismissed as local eccentricities or misunderstandings, were now being reevaluated through the lens of a serial predator, causing a ripple of renewed fear. The media's involvement, which had initially been a catalyst for the discovery, now served as an amplifier for the town's growing anxiety. Journalists were still in town, prowling the edges of the community, looking for new angles, new revelations, new ways to frame the Willow Creek monster. Every time a new article was published, it reopened the wound. The families of the victim were besieged by requests for interviews, their privacy eroded by the demands of a public that treated their tragedy as a serialized drama. The tension between the need for truth and the need for peace was never reconciled. The town felt like an aquarium, with the entire world watching them, waiting for the next crack to appear in the glass, a pressure that only served to increase the sense of isolation and defensive posturing. The forensic technology that had finally cracked the case also became a subject of intense local debate. There was a sense of betrayal in the knowledge that the tools to solve the case had existed for years, but the resources had been lacking. The contrast between the slow, underfunded investigation of the 90s and the high-tech, precision-focused approach of the current era created a sense of systemic resentment. People felt that if the state had prioritized the case earlier, if they had cared more about the disappearance of a young woman from a rural town, the last 3 decades might have looked very different. This systemic anger added a layer of political complexity to the situation, as the community began to demand accountability from the very institutions that had once ignored them, leading to a statewide push for better cold case funding. The killer's house, still sitting on the quiet, tree-lined street, became a site of pilgrimage for the curious and the morbid. People drove by slowly, staring at the windows, trying to visualize the horror that had taken place within, or perhaps simply trying to understand how such an ordinary-looking structure could have served as a tomb for such a long, secret history. The owner's family, who had been left behind to deal with the fallout of his identity, became social outcasts. They were the collateral damage of his long-held lie, forced to navigate a community that looked at them with a mix of pity and suspicion. Their life in Willow Creek was essentially over. They were the ghost of the monster that had been, and there was no place for them in the town's new, hardened reality. In the midst of this, the detectives faced the quiet, grueling work of finality. They were cleaning up the loose ends, closing the remaining files, and preparing for the end of their assignment. They felt a sense of relief, but also a persistent, nagging doubt. Had they truly caught everything? The serial nature of the predator's actions suggested that there might be more, that he might have had other secrets that he had taken to the grave, or, in this case, to the prison cell. They had satisfied the law, they had satisfied the families, but they had not fully satisfied the doubt that was the hallmark of any truly cold case. The case was solved, but the questions remained, lingering in the air like the scent of ozone after a storm, an unsettling presence that wouldn't quite vanish. The town schools began to shift their focus as well. The teachers, realizing that the students were growing up in a world where the friendly neighbor was no longer a default assumption, began to introduce programs on personal safety and the importance of questioning authority. They were careful to avoid fear-mongering, but the tone of these lessons was unmistakably influenced by the 1992 case. It was a subtle, institutional response to a fundamental shift in the community's worldview. They were teaching the children how to inhabit a world that was no longer predictable, a world where the monsters were not outside, but were a part of the everyday, lived experience of their elders. It was an attempt to instill a healthy level of skepticism in a generation that was being raised on the ruins of their parents' naivety. The local churches, too, were grappling with the implications of the case. The sermons had changed, becoming more introspective, more focused on the presence of evil and the difficulty of finding grace in the wake of such profound betrayal. There was a new, raw honesty in the congregational life, a willingness to admit that the community had been failing itself for a long time. They talked about the importance of accountability, the need for transparency, and the necessity of confronting the darkness within their own walls. It was a difficult, painful process, but it was one that was helping to hold the town together, providing a framework for the complex emotions that were still boiling just beneath the surface, offering a space where the grief could be processed without judgment. As the investigation officially drew to a close, the lead detective took one last walk through the town. He stopped at the place where the victim had been seen last, a simple, nondescript intersection that had become the site of a memorial, a small, humble collection of flowers and photos. He felt the weight of the years, the weight of the search, and the weight of the truth. He realized that the case had been a turning point, a moment in the history of the town where everything changed. He felt a sense of accomplishment, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the resolution was, in many ways, just the beginning of a new, different kind of struggle. The town was not the same, and it would never be again, as it continued to grapple with the legacy of a 32-year-old crime that had finally been brought into the light. The town of Willow Creek was not the same, and it would never be again. The 1992 cold case had been a prism through which the community had been forced to view its own identity. It had exposed the fractures, the vulnerabilities, and the deep-seated, systemic flaws that had been hidden for so long. But it had also brought the truth, and in the truth, there was the potential for growth. The community was learning, the hard way, what it meant to be a truly vigilant, a truly aware, and a truly honest place to live. It was a slow, difficult, and ongoing journey, but it was one that they were finally, truly undertaking. The detectives left the town, but the story remained, a part of the permanent history of the area, a cautionary tale that would be told for generations. The final report was filed in the state archives, a massive document that served as a monument to the work of the team. It was a comprehensive record of the investigation, the evidence, the trial, and the impact of the case. It was a document that would, for generations, stand as a testament to the fact that, even after 32 years, the truth could be found, justice could be served, and the memory of a young woman could be honored. The investigators, having done their part, could finally step back, their work complete, their mission achieved, and their names a part of the long, complex history of the case, leaving behind a legacy of persistence and integrity. The town continued to live, to work, to grow, and to change. It was a place that was now defined by its past, by the secrets it had been forced to confront, and by the truth it had managed to uncover. The 1992 case was a part of the air they breathed, a part of the soil they tilled, and a part of the life they lived. It was a story of a community that had faced its worst nightmare and had survived, and in that survival had found a new, harder, and more durable kind of strength. They were building something new on the bedrock of the truth, even as they continued to feel the tremors of the past. The investigator's final reflection, as he drove away from the town for the last time, was that justice is not a singular event. It is a slow, methodical process that requires patience, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. It is the work of a lifetime, the work of a community, and the work of a society that values the humanity of its people above the convenience of its secrets. The case was solved, but the search for justice, in all its forms, was a process that would continue as long as there were people who cared, who listened, and who were willing to look into the darkness and find the truth, no matter the difficulty. The story was, in its own way, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. We are all living in a world of uncertainty, but we are also living in a world where the truth is a fundamental and an ultimate reality. The Willow Creek case was a reminder that even in the face of the most challenging circumstances, the truth will eventually come to light, and with it, the possibility of justice, of peace, and of a future that is, in its own, profound way, better than the past. The cold case was solved, and with it, the community of Willow Creek was finally and truly free from the shadow of the unknown. As the sun set on the plains, casting its final, golden light on the landscape, the detective could see the town in the distance, a small, humble collection of homes, a place where people lived, loved, and struggled, just like everyone else. He knew that the story of the 1992 case would always be a part of their identity, a part of their history, and a part of their future. And he felt a sense of profound, quiet gratitude for the work, for the truth, and for the opportunity to have been a part of a journey that was, in the end, about the most important thing of all, the truth. The final, lasting impact of the case was the realization that we are all, to some extent, defined by the stories we tell, the truths we ignore, and the secrets we keep. And as we continue to live our lives, to seek the truth, and to build our own stories, we do so with the knowledge that our actions matter, that our search for justice is a noble, necessary, and enduring pursuit, and that the truth, no matter how long it takes, will always, eventually, come into the light. The cold case was solved, and with it, the memory of the victim had been restored, a lasting, vibrant, and beautiful part of the history of the town, a testament to the power of the truth, the persistence of justice, and the enduring, unyielding strength of the human heart. The detective's final thoughts on the road were that the 1992 case had been the most significant experience of his career. It was a case that had challenged him, changed him, and forced him to confront the limits of his own knowledge, the boundaries of his own belief, and the depth of his own commitment to the truth. It was a case that had taught him that the most important thing is not just to solve the mystery, but to understand the human reality behind it, the loss, the grief, the hope, and the enduring power of the truth. He felt a sense of peace, a sense of closure, and a sense of gratitude for the journey, knowing that the work of truth, justice, and humanity was never-ending. The town, for its part, would continue to exist, to evolve, and to learn. The 1992 case would become a part of its lore, a part of its culture, and a part of the way it understood itself. It would be a story that was told not with the fear of the unknown, but with the wisdom of the learned. And as the residents moved forward, they did so with the knowledge that they were part of something that was larger, more resilient, and more enduring than the tragedy that had once nearly destroyed them. They were a community that had faced its worst, and in the process, had found the best within itself, building a future on the hard-won lessons of the past. The story was, in the end, a story of the human condition. It was a story of our flaws, our strengths, our failures, and our successes. And as we continue to live, to learn, and to grow, it is a story that will continue to remind us that no matter how dark the shadows may be, there is always the potential for light, for truth, and for justice. The cold case was solved, but the story of Willow Creek was far from over, a testament to the fact that life, even in the face of the most profound loss, is a persistent, enduring, and beautiful thing, one that is worth living, worth fighting for, and worth understanding, in all its complexity, its beauty, and its truth. The final reflection on the 1992 case is that the truth is the most powerful thing we have. It is the only thing that can truly set us free, the only thing that can truly bring us justice, and the only thing that can truly give us peace. And as long as we are willing to seek it, to listen to it, and to honor it, we will always have a way forward, a way to build our lives, and a way to create a world that is a little bit better, a little bit safer, and a little bit more profoundly just. The cold case was solved, and with it, the memory of the victim has been restored, a lasting, vibrant, and beautiful part of the history of the town, a testament to the power of the truth, the persistence of justice, and the enduring, unyielding strength of the human heart. The detective, now miles away from Willow Creek, felt a sense of relief as he drove into the sunset. He had done his part. He had brought the truth, he had secured the justice, and he had helped the community to move forward. He was a part of the long, complex history of the case, and he was, in his own way, a part of the future of the town. He looked at the road ahead, a path of infinite possibility, and he knew that there were other cases, other stories, and other truths waiting to be discovered. He felt a sense of hope, a sense of purpose, and a sense of commitment, confident in the power of the truth to guide, to heal, and to, ultimately, make everything right. The town of Willow Creek, in the quiet, expansive region, would continue to live on, a testament to the fact that even in the face of the most profound darkness, there is the potential for light. The case was a reminder that the truth is always there, waiting to be found, and that justice, no matter how long it takes, is always, eventually, possible. And as the story of the 1992 cold case continues to be told, it will serve as a beacon, a reminder of the power of the truth, the persistence of justice, and the enduring, unyielding spirit of the human heart, forever, in the heart of the town, and in the lives of those who have been touched by the tragedy. The final takeaway from the experience was that we are all, to some extent, living in the shadow of the past. But it is our responsibility, our privilege, and our duty to ensure that the shadows do not define our future. We must be willing to confront the truth, to acknowledge the losses, and to move forward with courage, with compassion, and with an unwavering commitment to the truth. The Willow Creek case was a lesson in this, a reminder that the truth is not just something we find. It is something we live, something we build, and something we protect every single day as we navigate the complex, beautiful and sometimes incredibly difficult journey of being human. The 1992 cold case had become a permanent part of the local consciousness. It was a touchstone for conversations about morality, about the role of the law, and about the nature of a community. People who had once been total strangers were now bound by the shared memory of the arrest and the trial. They talked about the changes in the town, about the new security measures, and about the shift in how they interacted with each other. It was a conversation that was still ongoing, a dialogue that was helping to define what it meant to be a resident of Willow Creek in the post-arrest era. And as they continued to talk, they were building a new kind of community, one that was perhaps a little less trusting, but also a little more aware, a little more engaged, and a little more prepared to deal with the realities of life. The detectives, while no longer on the ground, remained in contact with the families, checking in, providing support, and ensuring that they were doing okay. They knew that the resolution of the case was not the end of the road for them. The emotional weight of the loss was a lifelong journey, and they were, in their own way, a part of that journey. They had become more than just investigators. They had become partners in a shared, long-term process of healing. This was the most unexpected, and perhaps the most important, result of the investigation, the formation of a bond that went beyond the badge, beyond the evidence, and beyond the law. The case was a reminder that we are all, in our own way, a part of a larger story, one that is linked to the stories of others. Our lives are intertwined in complex, subtle, and profound ways, and our actions, whether they are known or unknown, have a lasting impact. The investigation, by bringing the truth into the light, had not just solved a case, it had reaffirmed the importance of our connections, the necessity of our support for one another, and the enduring and often life-saving power of the truth. The final reflection on the experience is that the truth is the most powerful tool we have in the pursuit of a just world. It is the key to resolution, the foundation for healing, and the only path forward. We must be willing to seek it no matter how long it takes, and we must be willing to stand by it no matter how hard it is. The story of the 1992 cold case is a testament to this, a powerful reminder that justice, when combined with dedication and truth, is always possible, and that no matter how long the silence may be, the truth will always, inevitably, find a way to speak. As the years continue to pass, the 1992 case will become an increasingly important part of the regional history. It will be studied by law enforcement, by historians, and by sociologists. It will be a case study in the power of modern forensics, the necessity of persistent investigation, and the endurance of the human spirit. But for the people of Willow Creek, it will always be more than a case study. It will be a personal, living part of their town, a memory that is still unfolding, still healing, and still, in its own way, finding its place in the world. The detective's final thoughts, as he looks back on his long and storied career, are that the case was the most difficult, the most challenging, and the most rewarding. It was a case that had challenged him, changed him, and forced him to confront the limits of his own knowledge, the boundaries of his own belief, and the depth of his own commitment to the truth. He realized that the mystery was not just about the evidence, but about the human element, the loss, and the importance of ensuring that the truth, no matter how small, no matter how obscure, is never, ever forgotten. The 1992 cold case was solved, and with it, the community found its way out of the darkness. It was a journey that had been long, difficult, and full of pain, but it was a journey that had, in the end, brought them to a place of truth, a place of resolution, and a place where the memory of the victim could finally, truly be honored. The case was over, but the story, the memory, and the truth were eternal, a permanent part of the heartbeat of the town, and a testament to the fact that justice, in all its forms, is the ultimate goal of the human journey. The final word on the matter is that the truth, no matter how long it stays buried, will always find its way into the light. It is a fundamental law of human existence, and one that we must all respect, honor, and uphold. The 1992 cold case is a powerful testament to this truth, a story that reminds us that no matter how hard the path may be, no matter how long the wait may be, the truth will always prevail, and with it, justice will always find its place, anchoring our societies in the reality we share. This initiative, informally dubbed the Willow Creek Review, changed the culture of the police department overnight. The detectives who had worked the 1992 case became the standard-bearers for a new methodology, one that prioritized data, cross-jurisdictional cooperation, and, most importantly, the persistent, cyclical reevaluation of old leads through the lens of modern forensics. They moved away from the lone wolf investigator model, where one detective held the keys to a case for years, and transitioned into a collaborative, multidisciplinary approach. They worked with genealogists, digital forensic experts, and dedicated victim advocates, recognizing that solving a cold case was not just a technical challenge, it was a human-centric recovery project. The success of the 1992 case served as the undeniable proof of concept that changed the trajectory of law enforcement for the entire region, proving that time was no longer an insurmountable barrier to the truth. However, the internal shift in policing was only one part of a much broader and arguably more profound societal evolution. The residents of Willow Creek, having lived through the visceral exposure of a killer within their own ranks, began to question the very fabric of their social cohesion. The phenomenon of community trust, once a point of pride and a defining characteristic of their small-town life, was now approached with a healthy, albeit somber, skepticism. Parent-teacher associations, local clubs, and civic organizations began to implement rigorous background checks, transparency protocols, and safety standards that would have been unimaginable just a few years prior. The town had lost its innocence, yes, but in its place, it had gained a level of institutional maturity that was unprecedented. They were no longer a town that pretended nothing could go wrong. They were a town that built the systems to ensure that if something did, it would be caught, addressed, and resolved. This change extended far beyond the city limits to the families of victims across the entire region. The resolution of the 1992 case gave, for the first time in decades, tangible hope to hundreds of families who had effectively given up on the idea of justice. Advocacy groups that had previously been sidelined by local authorities were now treated as essential partners in the investigative process. The Regional Cold Case Network emerged, providing a platform for families to pool their stories, share tips, and maintain persistent pressure on law enforcement to keep their cases active. They held town halls, memorial services, and awareness campaigns, effectively turning the tragedy of 1992 into a movement for long-term accountability. The case was no longer just a headline. It was the genesis of a regional commitment to never allowing another predator to exploit the silence of the community. Yet, despite this organizational progress, the personal and psychological toll on those most closely affected remained a raw, unhealed reality. For the victim siblings, who had spent over 3 decades living with the void of their sister's disappearance, the closure provided by the verdict was complex and layered. There was the profound satisfaction of the conviction, certainly, but there was also the overwhelming weight of the years lost to the silence. They found themselves mourning their sister twice, once when she first disappeared, and again, with even greater clarity and pain, when they realized the full, mundane, and monstrous nature of the man who had stolen her future. The trial had forced them to relive every detail, to see the evidence, and to hear the clinical, detached testimony of the man who had killed her. It was a secondary, acute trauma that the legal system wasn't fully equipped to address, highlighting the need for specialized support long after the gavel fell. This prompted a new, localized focus on victim services and post-conviction support. Mental health professionals began to work more closely with the families of long-term missing persons, acknowledging that the resolution of a case is not the end of the trauma, but rather the beginning of a different, more introspective, and often more painful phase of grief. They focused on narrative reconstruction, helping the families to integrate the truth of what happened into their personal and family histories, so that the victim was no longer a cold case in their own minds, but a person whose life and death were fully understood, honored, and mourned. This emphasis on long-term emotional care became one of the most lasting and positive legacies of the Willow Creek investigation, creating a model for how communities should support those left behind by violence. The media's role also underwent a significant, necessary transformation. The initial, sensationalistic focus on the Willow Creek Monster eventually gave way to a more nuanced, documentary-style interest in the mechanics of a case. Podcasters, investigative journalists, and filmmakers began to study the 1992 case, not for its shock value, but as a critical teaching tool. They explored the intersection of technology and justice, the ethics of genetic genealogy, and the systemic failures that had allowed the killer to remain hidden for so long. This shift in discourse helped to move the conversation away from the lurid, superficial details of the crime and toward a more constructive, educational focus on how to prevent such failures in the future. It was a sign of a society that was beginning to move from a place of fear to a place of understanding, from a place of voyeurism to a place of systemic engagement. As the detectives and forensic teams looked back on their work, they reflected on the sheer, fragile nature of the breakthroughs they had achieved. They knew that the resolution had been the result of a perfect storm of conditions: the fortuitous preservation of the biological evidence, the rapid advancement of genetic sequencing technology, the dedicated focus of the team, and the willingness of the community to finally, collectively, face the truth. They understood that this kind of success couldn't be guaranteed for every case. Some secrets, they realized, would always remain lost to the erosion of time, the failure of record-keeping, and the inherent, messy, and unpredictable nature of the human world.